Hey guys, my name is Marta, welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be sharing with you most of the things that I read in my first year of university. So I have already mentioned it here a few times, but if you're new to my channel, hi, I am a modern languages and literature student from Spain, and in my degree we have to choose a major, and my major is in French. So most of the books that you will see here are French novels. So yeah, without further ado, let's get to the books because they are quite a lot and I don't want to make the intro way too long. First, I'm going to start with the book that I read for the most simple subject, and it was a book that I read for my French language class. We had to choose whatever book we wanted as long as it was written in French to then do a review of it. So I went with one that was actually one of my favorite reads of last year, and it is Manqué by Jacqueline Hartman. This is a book that was written at the end of the 20th century. This book is about these women who are trapped inside a cave because something will happen and they ended up there, nobody knows why, and they are guarded by these words and they have to repeat the same routine day after day. Suddenly one day something strange happens and they get to escape, and they go on exploring the world that is way more devastated than what they were expecting. We follow the perspective of this little girl who has actually never seen any man and doesn't really know how the world was before this strange event happened. This is sort of a survival story overall. We see how some of these women die because of many reasons. It is a pretty sad book also because of the writing style and because we get to see this little girl who knows from the very beginning that one day everyone will be dead but her, because he is the youngest. So yeah, I really like it. It was one of my best reads of last year, and I do recommend it if you want to read something. And I do recommend you read it in French if you speak French, because it has a very easy to follow writing style and the sentences aren't so difficult. Next, I'm going to go with the many books that I read for my literary theory class. In this class, we had to read a lot of stuff, from short stories to novels to some extra reading that I did. So we're going to start with some of the short stories. I am not going to share with you every single one of them because they are a lot, but yeah, we have this little printed thingy with all the short stories that we had to read, and we had to read every single one and then tie it into a literary theory, either one of the modern ones or of the more ancient ones. The story that we read was The Birds by Daphne du Maurier, and it was actually one of my favorite things I read for this class. You know from me talking about her that I absolutely adore Daphne du Maurier's writing style, and The Birds was not a disappointment. It was very creepy. It had that very dark atmosphere that I love, that all of her novels that I've read have. If you have never heard of it, it's about this town who suddenly gets all these birds who are trying to kill everyone, and nobody knows why, nobody knows the reason why that's happening, but you get to see a lot of tension in the people's reaction, and it's so good. I do recommend it, especially now that the autumn is nearing. And as I said, I'm not going to talk about all the short stories, but I'm going to highlight two more, and one of them is the very famous Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. I read and absolutely adored that novel, to the point where I actually read the entire thing for one of the extra reading things that we could do. It's a fairy tale retelling, a very, very dark one, about this woman who marries this man, and then this man leaves her alone in his castle, and then weird things start happening. He starts realizing some things, and yeah, it's a very dark story, a very powerful one in terms of feminism, and I really, really liked it. And I also really enjoyed the other short stories in this fairy tale retellings collection, sort of. They are all very dark, they all have these feminist themes hidden within, and I absolutely recommend you read them, and all the Bloody Chamber and the rest of the stories that are in the Bloody Chamber short story collection. The last short story that I want to highlight is Edgar Allan Poe's Descent into the Milestone. This is one of Edgar Allan Poe's most famous stories. in which we follow this man who gets told by another man about something that happened to this second man, and it's very dark, it's very creepy, and if you are scared of the sea, you will be really scared when reading this one. And yeah, we tied this one to Kant's theories on the sublime, and it was very fascinating to see how those depict on the story, because Kant says that when someone sees something that should be scary from afar, he gets fascinated by it, but when one experiences it, he gets very scared. And basically, when you are fascinated, that is what we call the sublime. And yeah, it was very interesting to see that depicted in the story, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Of course, it's Edgar Allan Poe. I'm going to the novels that I had to read for this class. The first one was the very marvelous, absolutely amazing Frankenstein by Benny Shelley. I am not going to say the synopsis of this one because everyone knows what it's about, but I absolutely loved studying it. It's such a fun story to read over and over again, and also one that is great to hear different thoughts on, because everyone interprets it in a way. And for this one, we tied it into Aristotle's theories, and it was very interesting to do that. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Of course, it was a read for me, and I cannot wait to read it over and over again, hopefully in the future for another class, because this is one of my favorite books to reread, as I have already said. Next, I read Exercises in Style by Raymond Queneau. This is a French novel that's very weird. If you have never heard of this one, this is a novel that isn't really a novel, because it's a book where the author basically says the same thing over and over again, but in different words. It is a very interesting thing to read and analyze, and also to translate, because I was thinking about this lately, and this one has been translated from French, but most of the ways that the story can be retold are by changing the words to synonyms or to sentences that have the same meaning than the original one. And it makes me think a lot about how it is in the original language, and also how it has been translated to other languages, because every language has its words that sound funny in one way or in another. So I am looking forward to reading this one in the original language in the future, and also reading an English translation, because I am really curious to see different translations of this one. We type this one into the Fabula and Suicide theory by Vladimir Prop and Viktor Shklovsky, two Russian literary theorists that thought about the way that language affects how you tell a story, and basically they based their theories on the power of language and not really on the meaning of the story and what it is trying to say. We also got to read La Barracca by Vicente Velasco Ibáñez. This is a Spanish classic that I don't think has been translated into English, but I will put an English translation here that I found on Goodreads, and it might be available as an ebook, but I don't know. We type this one into Karl Marx theories on, of course, capitalism and the communist movement. And in this book we follow this man who moves to this very small town to live in the house of a man that has recently died there. He has to deal with all the prejudices of the other people from the town who see him as a raider and do not really trust him or nor what he is doing there. And yeah, it's a lot about prejudices, about modernity coming into the city and how that affects people. It is a really good book to analyze. It is a piece of the realist movement, so it is filled with social critique, and if it is translated and you are interested in how the Valencian society lived in that era, I suggest you check it out. And the last book we read for the subject was the very good, the magnificent Turn of the Screw by Henry James, another reread for me. Also a book that I love to reread multiple times, and he studied this one to relating it to the modern theories of unreliable narrators and all that kind of stuff. I am not going to say the synopsis of this one because I am pretty sure everyone has read about it in any point of their life, and yeah, I adore studying it. I adore hearing other people's perspectives on what happens in the story and what's real and what's not, and yeah, I loved it. Of course, the historia no solo escribo. It's also one of the novels that introduced me to classical literature a few years ago, so I will forever appreciate it. The next two books are the ones that I read as optional reads, besides the one that I have already showed, and they are My Cousin Rachel by Nina Boraoui, a book on which you can hear my opinions in my January wrap-up, so I will link that video in the description. In this one we follow this man who moves to the house with his cousin Rachel, who was this woman that met his uncle very recently, and now his uncle is dead, and he moves with him because she has inherited this mansion. And it is, of course, a very dark book, as all of Daphne du Maurier's are. Most of the characters in the story are at the very beginning hiding things from us. They are hiding who they are, what has happened, and yeah, very mysterious, very gothic, very creepy. I do recommend it. And the last book, I don't think I have ever seen mentioned on BookTube, so I will put the English translation here. It is a piece of Italian literature, and it has been translated to Spanish as Los Hermosos Años del Castigo by Flag Jaegi. This book is set in an all-girls boarding school, and we basically follow these two girls who become friends at the very beginning and have this weird fascination towards each other. It is a really short book filled with themes like discovering yourself, discovering your sexuality. It's so good. I need to reread it because I read it very fast and I don't remember much about it, but yeah, I do recommend it. Please read it. It's fascinating, and it has an all-girls boarding school, and not many books have that. Next class I'm going to be talking about is my Catalan language class, and for this subject we had to read two books, and none of them has been translated into English because they are all local works by local authors. But anyway, the first one was La Lengua de Valencias by Sanchis Wagner. This is an essay that reflects on our language and on how many people speak it, and its origins, its use nowadays, its use around time. It is very interesting. I enjoyed reading it. It wasn't the best thing, but it was overall interesting. The other one that we had to read was Anno. We could choose from 3 books, but I chose this one, and it is El Tranvía Groc by Joan Francesc Mira. This is Joan Francesc Mira's autobiography on which he reflects on his childhood. We get to see how much society has changed over the years, how he lived during the Spanish dictatorship that happened last century, and we see him grow up, we see him becoming. It wasn't the best thing I have ever read, but I really enjoyed it in a way, and it was great to see how much society has changed and how the society of that time affected Joan Francesc Mira and his way of seeing the world now. Next class I had in the first semester was one Introduction to French Literature class, and for this class we read a lot. In general, the class was divided in 2 parts, one for narrative works and poetry, and the other one for theatre and plays, and each part had different professors, so that's why I'm separating them. And I'm going to start with the poetry and narrative one. First, for the about the poems, I do not have them here with me, but we read poems by Victor Hugo, by Baudelaire, by Rimbaud, and Verlaine, and by some more maybe, where poems went from the French Romanticism to the Symbolist movement. Yeah, overall great poems. I really love studying poems because I find them very fun to analyze, and I love most of these authors, so it was also great to study them. Before I get to the books, we also read fragments of other novels that were very important. So we read extracts from Le Boucher Le Noir by Stendhal and Bovary by Flaubert, and also, and last, extracts from Le Père Goriot by Balzac. Now, getting into the actual novels that I read, well, they aren't really novels. I would classify them as novellas and a short story. But the first one was Une partie de campagne by Guy de Maupassant. This is a short story about, as the title says, impacted the campaign. It's about this family who goes to have this sort of picnic around nature, and yeah, I didn't really like it. Yeah, it is a love story, it is cute, it isn't the best thing, and I do have to say that I prefer Maupassant's more weird, horror-esque stories. But yeah, it was fun to read, not the greatest thing ever. Next we read two novellas, and first one is Encore Simple by Flaubert. This is the story of this very old woman, and it is inspired by the author's life, getting old, and we see how it affects her views on the world, how she gets old as time passes. I do not remember much about it because I didn't really like it, but yeah, another book that I read. Next, and I think the only novel that I really enjoyed for this class was Dernier jour d'un condamné by Victor Hugo. This is translated to English as The Last Day of a Condemned Man, I think. No idea, I will put the English translation somewhere. In this book, Victor Hugo depicts the last day alive of this man who has been sentenced to death and who is aware that he's going to die. We see how knowing that he has only a few hours left affect the way he acts that day and the way he sees the world. It is a very sad story in which Victor Hugo denounces the death penalty, and yeah, it's very hard to read, very sad, very raw, and of course a bit poetic because it's Victor Hugo. Next, for the fever part, I have to read 4 plays, so from the 19th century to the early to middle 20th century. The first one I read was Hernani by Victor Hugo. Another Victor Hugo, I know this is one of his plays in which you can really see how much of a wild ride French romantic theatre was. In it, we follow Hernani, as the title says, who is absolutely and crazily in love with Doña Sol. And then, so he ends up inside this love square between him, Doña Sol, Don Carlos, and Don Rui. And this is a wild ride in which you can see how heavily inspired French romantic plays were by Shakespeare's, because this one is basically a mix between Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet. And Hernani, basically as Hamlet in his play, acts according to his feelings and does crazy things that make no sense to a normal person. But yeah, this book is filled with very deep speeches that have a lot of power and in which you can really see how each character feels. At the end, I'm not gonna spoil it, but if you read Romeo and Juliet, it's very similar, but it's also funny in a way. Next play I read, it was La Dame de Maxime by Georges Feydeau. This is a vaudeville play, so the plays that were played for the normal around people, and it is of course a comic play. In it we follow, as the title says, La Dame de Maxime, also called as La Môme, is a prostitute that one day wakes up in the house of Monsieur Petitpon, and this story goes from there. It's also a crazy ride in a funny way. You see how one thing leads to one another and everything ends up being messed up. It is a crazy wild ride filled with funny things, filled with so much fun, and yeah, I would actually reread this, to be honest, because it was really fun. Next I read one of my favorite plays I read, along with the one that I'm going to talk about afterwards, and it is Jean Cocteau's La Machine Infernale. This is a magnificent play that is a part of this literary movement that went on between the First and Second World War in France, in which theatre authors, decided to write plays heavily inspired by ancient myths to depict the emotions that they were feeling and the uncertainness about a new war coming. And this one is a retelling of the story of Oedipus, so a retelling of Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, one of my favorite Greek plays, by the way. And we follow the story of Oedipus from the moment where he heals the Sphinx, how do you pronounce that, to his honeymoon. And yeah, it is a crazy book filled with weirdly funny sentences that only make sense if you know the Oedipus story. So if you wanna read this and you don't know the myth, please check that out because you will miss a lot of stuff. It is a modernization of the myth, as I already said, was really refreshing because I have never seen this funny twist in a retelling before. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I am looking forward to reading more plays in this literary movement. I read two as optional stuff that I read for my own knowledge, so I am not going to talk about them here, but if you want to hear about them, I will link, as I have already said, my January wrap down below, and that's where I talk about them. But yeah, this one I recommend. I am in love with Jean Cocteau, by the way, so yeah, I want to read more from him. So yeah, La Vagina Infernal, a play that I really recommend, especially if you like retellings of Greek myths and you wanna see a fun spin on one of them. Last play I read, and my favorite because this play has a special place in my heart, Enathan and Godot by Samuel Beckett, or Waiting for Godot in English. This play we follow Didi and Gogo, who are waiting for Godot in this desolate place where there is anything more than a tree and a bench. It is a very sad story if you know the context it was written and why it was written, so I heavily suggest you check out some info on the theater of the absurd before you go into it, so you can see how the book isn't really funny but sad. I adore it. I adore studying this one. I had already read it in high school, so it was great to read it again. Yeah, one of my favorite plays. I am very fascinated by absurd theater as well, so it was good to get to read it and talk about it, and yeah, I adored it. Nothing else to say. We all love Samuel Beckett. And now moving on to what I read in my second semester. First I have La Cripta de los Capuchinos by Joseph Roth. It is of German literature that I read for my contemporary European history class. I will put the English translation of the novel here so you can see it. Basically, this is a very historical novel that I recommend either if you want to learn more about the time period, or if you already know and want to read a piece of literature that really depicts the feelings that were felt in Austria during this time. The story goes from the decadentist times at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th to right before the Second World War. So very difficult times for. And in it we follow Francisco Trota, who is basically a family member of the emperor's house, but not really. You will get to know why if you read it. We see how his place in society changes through the eras. We see him living this very decadent life before the World War starts to going into war and how that affects his way of seeing the world afterwards. It is a book that depicts a lot of things, a lot of changes that happen. You get to see how women's position in society changes, how the way people see the world change, how different nations get broken and formed again. It is overall a pretty sad book on which I have to make a historical commentary and got a top mark on, by the way, so be proud of me. Overall, I really enjoyed the writing style and I want to check out more from Joseph Roth. Last but not least, the next things are the things that I read for my French literature and culture class. And in this one, same as with the introduction to French literature class, besides the things that I'm going to show physically, we also read poems, and overall the subject was dedicated to literature written in French but not from France. And the subject was divided in two parts as well, one for the European countries as well as Canada, and other one for the different African regions and other places that were colonized by the French. Very different things, and we're going to start from Europe. Besides the things that I have here, we read poems and fragments of Madame de Stael's icon translation, as well as Rousseau's Social Contract, and as well as poems from Bernard, which I really liked and got a collection of his poems recently, by the way, and some more people whose name I have forgotten now. About the actual things that I read, we could also choose from a wide range of things, so I went and I decided to go with these three. So we are going to start from the most ancient one, which is Los Ablo by Maurice Mataglin. I have talked about this book many times, so I will not talk much about it again, but you can see me talk about it, rave about it in my May wrap-up as well as in my big year freak of that, because this was one of my favorite things I have read so far in the year. This is a symbolist play in which we follow these kids who have a wild ride one night and get to travel to this fantasy land in which they are supposed to find the bluebird in order to save this little child from an illness. Play is basically filled with symbols that say a lot without saying anything at the same time, as all symbols do, and it is very beautifully written, it is very fantastical, it has a lot of hidden stuff, and I really recommend you read it. I'm so sorry for the change in the angle, but I was getting tired from standing up for such a long time, so I decided to sit, and you now can see empty shelves, so I'm so sorry. And now you can see empty shelves, so I am super sorry for that, but I am tired and we still have quite a few more books to talk about. What thing I read was La Vie de Vansua by Roman Gary. This is a piece. By the way, the other one was a piece of Belgian literature, I completely forgot to say it. But this one, Roman Gary, it's an author that I don't remember where he's from really, but he was from a lot of places because he traveled to a lot of places. In this book we follow this little Jew kid who lives in this building in a marginal region of his city, and there he lives with a bunch of other kids who are also marginalized. And yeah, our main character is Jew. He has never met his parents, and in this one we see him grow up, to see him getting to know himself, getting to know the world, getting to know who he is. It is a very pretty sad book that I really recommend you read, because I had never heard about it before and I really enjoyed it. And next, the piece of Canadian literature that I chose was L'Orangerie by Lagui Tremblay. This is a very short novel that I absolutely despised, in which we follow two twins, Ahmed and Aziz, who live somewhere in Africa, and one day their parents have to choose either one of them to sacrifice for the sake of the country, or so they say. It is, and we see the perspective of the one that survives and how that event affects him and his way of acting and all of that. This book is heavily inspired by Giver, and you can really see it from the way it's told. It is a story that lacks description, which is the main reason why I hated it, and it is filled with dialogues. It is pretty raw and sad, but as I said, it lacked the description that I like in my novels, so that's why I didn't really like it. And next, for the other half of the subject, we talked a lot about French colonization and authors from there. We got to read poems from poets that were part of the Negritude movement, which was a French literary movement from all these colonized regions, especially the African ones, who wanted to claim their rights and fight against their colonizers. So we got to read extracts from poets like Léopold Senghor Senghor, David Diop, Messer and Leon González Damas, as well as read fragments from Maghrebian literature, and we got to read extracts from Garçon by Nina Boraoui, and other novels that, if I remember, I will list down here because I don't remember right now and I am really tired, so I don't feel like looking them up. Yeah, last but not least, the novels that I read for this class, for this part of the class, I read two French works and one essay. Starting from the essay, it was Portrait d'un colonisé et Portrait du colonisateur by Albert Memmi. This is an essay in which Albert Memmi has the views of a colonized and a colonizer. It is pretty interesting. It is pretty interesting to read, to get to know why they act, why each part acts the way they act. It's a very important one, I think, in terms of African literature essays. So yeah, I do recommend it because I think it's very important to read some of this stuff from time to time. And last, the two novels I read. First, Indiana by George Sand. I have raved about this many times, so I will not talk about this one too much. But in this book we follow a girl, Indiana, who has an affair because this man was here married. It is basically like Madame Bovary and all those European classics, but this one is actually written by a woman, which is nice. It talks a lot about women in position and about how being of mixed race affects you as a person, because Indiana our main character is mixed. So yeah, really enjoyed it. I recommend it. Plus we have Georgies by Alexander Dumas. This is one of Alexander Dumas' lesser known works, and it is heavily inspired by his father's life, who was a slave that got liberated and then he got rich. And in this book we follow a man who is basically the same. It is named Georges. He's a guy who was educated in France because his father had the money to send him there, and then goes back to the island where he's from and starts taking revenge on the man that is married to the woman he likes. It is a very adventurous novel, as most of Dumas are, and I overall enjoyed it, but it wasn't the greatest thing. So I think if you love Dumas, read it. If you don't, check out some of his other works. And yeah, that was finally all. I am very tired, so I will not rush much. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was very tiring to film because it was extremely long. And comment down below if you read any of these books, and comment down below if you are a literature student, what have you studied this last academic year. And I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me, and I hope you guys are amazing, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!